We can go now to Johannesburg to talk to Michael Braun, a researcher at the University of the Witwatersrand. Michael, it's been said that these could be a watershed election for the ANC. How likely is that to be?
I think it definitely will, and thank you for having me. I think that it still seems, and the results are still preliminary, but I think most of the estimates were that the ANC would be dropping below 50%. And from what we've seen so far, I think that remains the case. And that would mean that they would have to form some kind of a coalition government with other parties if they wanted to govern. So it really is a big shift in the electoral terrain that we're seeing this year. And the increase in turnout, I think, will probably be benefiting some of the opposition parties. I think there are signs that a lot of new voters have come out, and there's greater excitement about the polls, I think, this year compared to other years. So I think that turnout will see a lot of more viable parties be emerging after the polls are counted.
And why do you think there was such a rise in turnout? Because this very much goes against the trend of a lot of other democracies.
Yeah, so I think, so first of all, I am at the university in Johannesburg, but I'm currently located in Durban. So particularly in the province that I'm in KwaZulu-Natal, and I was doing some work at the polling stations yesterday. In KwaZulu-Natal, the turnout really dropped quite a bit after Jacob Zuma, who's from this province, was removed as president. So I think that there has been a resurgence, particularly in this province, of people coming back to the polls with his newly formed Umkhonto we Sizwe, or MK party. So I think in this province, we can kind of expect a lot of those disillusioned ANC voters to be moving to that new party, which is really poised to be a big player. They might win the provincial level here in KwaZulu-Natal, and they could be a very viable coalition party. So for the national level. So I think that this increase in viable parties really makes people think their vote matters more than in previous elections, where it really seemed like it was a foregone conclusion that the ANC would win.
Okay, and President Cyril Ramaphosa promised change when he came into office. Many observers say he hasn't delivered. Is that a default of him and the ANC, or are there perhaps things outside their control?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is really outside of the control of President Cyril Ramaphosa. So, for instance, I mean, all of the corruption and state-owned enterprises decaying under the Zuma administration, it was kind of left to him to pick up some of those pieces, because decisions, as we know in politics, decisions made 10 years ago do affect where we're at today. So I think he had a lot to deal with. There's also the increase in the price of gasoline and COVID, obviously. So there was a lot they had to deal with. But unfortunately, from my work on the ground, voters blame him for that. They think that that basically things were better. I mean, this is in KwaZulu-Natal, but that things were better under the Zuma administration in terms of cost of living. There was less load shedding at the time, which is when the electricity cuts out on a scheduled basis. So I think even though it might not be Cyril Ramaphosa and the current government's fault, they are blamed for a lot of those things that maybe make more difficult now.
And if the ANC does lose its majority, it is likely to be forced into a coalition. Who can we expect to be in that coalition with them?
Yeah, I mean, those things are, it is difficult to predict because they're politicians, so they're keeping these things close to their vest, and they do, all of the parties, MK activists I spoke to, they think they're going to win at the national level. So before the election, they're all saying that they're going to win, obviously. But what I see as being most likely, and looking at what the numbers look like they might be, it does seem like the ANC could have a coalition with MK that would bring them over the 50% mark. And since the MK is only, a lot of them are very recently ANC members, that might be something, if there's not animosity or not too much animosity between the groups, that does seem like a workable solution, whereas the EFF left quite a while ago from it split from the ANC 11 years ago now. So I think there would maybe be less of the ANC would be less willing to give them a role in the government, whereas maybe the MK, which is largely a faction of the ANC, might just come back for a coalition government.
So there are possibilities of the ANC joining up with basically splinter parties. Can we expect a dramatic policy shift if the ANC joins with either or both of those?
Yeah, so I think either of those parties, we would expect to see, I guess, a kind of movement towards the left in some ways, which is kind of, I guess, the policy issues we might see raised would be something like increasing land reform. Both the MK and the EFF talk about nationalizing industries, so maybe we would see a rollback of some of the privatization that's been happening. But I think land would be a major issue that they would look at, and in general, more state spending. But what comes along with that, and what has been kind of the history of largesse in state spending in South Africa is that a lot of corruption comes along with that. And those parties, we might be afraid that any of those parties might be trying to take a piece of that spending. So there is kind of the fear that corruption could increase if you have some of those parties as part of a coalition.
Michael Braun, a researcher at the University of the Witwatersrand, thank you very much.